their expenses. This is the smallest of the three main budgetary items, the smallest. Before a drug can legally be sold in this country, it has to be approved by the FDA wherever it's made. Approval depends on the company demonstrating in clinical trials that a new drug is reasonably safe and effective. But compared with what? They don't have to compare their new drugs with existing drugs to treat the same condition with the best standard treatment. In most cases, they only have to compare their new drugs with a placebo. That is the major output of this industry, and these are old drugs judged not to be any better than drugs already in the market. That is, Me Too drugs, trivial variations of drugs already in the market, and this is this industry's major output now. Well, why? Well, that's where the money is. This is just for last year, and you can see that everything was a Me Too drug. There were 93 drugs approved, 75 were Me Too drugs. There were 18 that were new molecular entities, but only 6 of those were judged to be improvements.
I was trained in the pharmaceutical industry that all drugs are toxins. Don't ever say that a drug is safe. That's not true. And any drug at any time, no matter how innocuous you may consider it to be, could kill anyone depending on their individual biochemical makeup. They could have an adverse reaction. They could have an anaphylactic reaction, which means that the body actually has an allergy to the drug, and they can die. So there's no such thing as a safe drug. Well, I wish that I had $1 for every time that the industry had told me I had to say that the last 10 years that I was a rep. All of a sudden, in 1992, there was a little piece of legislation that was passed called the PDUFA Act, the Prescription Drug Users Fee Act of 1992. In essence, what that did was it opened up the floodgates for the pharmaceutical manufacturers to fund the FDA. Now think about this. In Texas, we would call that the fox mining the hen house. And what these manufacturers have to pay is up to $350,000 per new drug application. So we're not talking chump change here. We're talking an excessive amount of money that the pharmaceutical industry is allowed to put into the FDA. And what that does is it allows the FDA to fast track the pharmaceutical industry's products through the pipeline, through the approval process. So you would think that the FDA would be the entity that would be performing the clinical tests on these drugs, right? But that's not the case. The FDA doesn't perform clinical studies. What the FDA does is they review the manufacturer's clinical studies that they've submitted.
to be able to trust the FDA because, after all, they regulate the pharmaceutical drugs that we take. However, they're allowing some of the advisors on their expert panels to have conflicts of interest.
Indeed.
And it seems like they're leaning toward even making those rules more lax as far as a conflict of interest.
It's a silly thing if your purpose is to protect the public, to loosen up the laws that make them regulate it responsibly.
Well, that sounds like a conflict of interest right there.
Well, it is. The whole conflict of interest that they're talking about, however, is one where they're looking at letting more people from Big Pharma who have a clear conflict of interest because their jobs are with the pharmaceutical industry. They're trying to bring more of those people and saying they're the experts that know the most about it and should be the ones making the decision.
And that they can't find any other people that are equivalent in their expertise.
Yeah. Well, that's not exactly true, although there is truth to it. I mean, a lot of people, the people who are working on the studies themselves for Big Pharma should know the most about it.
Well,
but the problem is they're biased in a way where they're trying to protect the company. And so they'll do what they can to convince others, and they will also pass drugs that shouldn't be passed because they want to make sure that their company is able to make return on investment.
So what would be wrong with allowing them on the committee just for their opinions about things and then not allowing them to vote? That only the experts without the financial conflict of interest could vote.
Right. See, Nurse Vicki understands it. She's got it right. Maybe we should send you to the FDA as an ambassador of truth to try and work this through, because it's not complicated. It's very straightforward. When there's a conflict of interest, you can't trust what the outcome's going to be because people, their career is on the line. So the fact that there are 20 to 25% of people today, before these possible new things are changed, who are making decisions with a vote on these committees is outrageous.
Well, the pharmaceutical companies we know gives and donates a lot of money to Congress.
Well, a couple of years ago, before the election, they gave away $500 million in that election year.
That's almost $1 million per congressperson just from pharmaceutical companies. You know that that's going to affect the way that they vote.
Well, either that or they're not going to get any more millions of dollars from them. So that they've got their own conflicts of interest. And that's how this, unfortunately, that's how this country is run today. And so we have to bite the bullet. We have to do what's right. We have to make sure that we protect the safety of the country. The FDA should be protecting the citizens of the country. Congress should be ensuring that FDA has the power it needs to be able to make that regulation. And what's happened is we now have the FDA basically owned by Big Pharma to the tune of about a third of the FDA's funding, because that's where when they fast track a drug, it means that they take a drug, they bring it to market sooner than they normally do. And that's a big advantage for the pharmaceutical company because that gets their drug out in the market sooner and they start making sales sooner. That's simple business.
And it makes more jobs.
It does a lot of good things, but it also creates some problems. You don't do as much research. You don't have the outcome studies you'd like to have. And it makes for them paying large sums of money that the FDA then depends on in order to do its job. So you're looking at 1/3 of its income coming from Big Pharma. That's
When I can't stop fiddling, I just takes me Ritalin. I'm popping and saying